Good morning and welcome to your Daily Game Face. I'm Dr. Kim Lannon. I'm here with Lou Blasi, who makes me laugh every Wednesday. We're talking about headphones that make my hair
looks
squashy.
on everything.
You what?
But looks on everything.
Well, you know.
The headphones make your head all squashy?
Yeah. So we're talking before we went on the air about the fact that we have a piece of glass between us. So that I'm always going, huh?
Yeah.
What? And he's saying stuff
After you yelled at me for see if I was losing my hearing.
Yelled at you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he told me to wear earbuds because I refuse to put those headphones on because they make my hair squashy.
It's fine. It's fine.
And
Earbuds.
So vanity overrules practicality.
That's fine. Yeah.
So I will happily, not reluctantly, happily put an earbud in, but those stupid headphones make me have hair squash.
Yeah, we
And
can't have that.
Squash.
No, we can't have that.
I have to have my,
Yep.
My coif. Anyway, good morning, you guys, and welcome to your Daily Game Face again. And we're very excited to be here today, aren't we?
I am.
It's a beautiful day. It's supposed to be pouring out, and it's actually 70 degrees out right now.
It's supposed to be pouring?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, where do you live?
I don't pay attention to the weather.
Well, I do, because it's really important to me
Show
that I
up
get
and deal
outside.
with whatever's there, right? You can't put any mental energy into the weather.
Well, it's not all of us can live on the beach.
It's worse on the beach.
Well, yeah, but you should
When
be
there's
able to
rain.
look out your beautiful window every day and see your beautiful weather.
Yes, it's gorgeous.
Anyway, so we have lots to talk about today. Did you know that? Oh, for people that are listening, because I know they are.
Yes.
Today, the beverage of choice is a mocha macadamia no sugar Splenda, half a Splenda, splash of skim milk, and iced medium.
Oh, wow.
As I take my sip. So for my friend out there that likes to know what I drink, and she drinks her hot chocolate, I'm giving her the heads up because...
Get a Dunkin' sponsorship.
It's what?
You should get a Dunkin' sponsorship. I'm going
to need big sponsors for this year's Boston Marathon. So anybody out there that wants to just drop a $10,000 gift in my lap so I don't have to deal with the next 6 months of raising money that makes my head explode, please do that.
Will Bill or Mr. Kraft give you a call if you don't make your $10,000?
Well, it would be for the Kraft Foundation that I'd be raising the money for, and so I'm debating of whether or not I do this because it's a lot of work.
Fundraising
and
10 grand.
I feel like I just did it. What?
Fundraising 10 grand? Yeah.
Fundraising 10 grand during the summer is a lot harder than doing it during winter because the holidays make it easier because you can still have parties in the summer, but you have parties for the holidays and you do giveaways that are different and like people are buying. It's just, it's a different thing. So you have to sort of reconfigure it. So summer parties are fun, outside bands, like, entry fees, all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot of work. And so given my schedule, as you know, I have, when I walked in here today, what was one of the things I said? I need an extra
day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or week.
Which is,
and then at the
be
same
careful
time,
what you
I
wish
said,
for.
and I need a vacation.
Yeah. Yep.
At the same time, I'd like a vacation and an extra day, please.
So Monday would have been a good day to run.
Thank you. I did run on Monday. I did a half a marathon. Yeah. We were going to do a whole together, myself and John. But, I pooped out. Because I haven't really been training for a whole, and I thought, I'd like to not be sore. So I would have made it probably 18 miles, but then I said, I'll hold. So we did do half.
Yeah. John does marathons too?
Well, he doesn't really do them. He walks along and meanders along or drives by and gives me water. And so we, as in we.
Okay. Yeah.
So now he's got, are you kidding me? He's disabled. He's got a hurt knee.
I can imagine.
A hurt elbow, a hurt neck, a hurt bicep. He tore his bicep a year and a half ago and still hasn't had it fixed.
Tore it. Wow.
So that's not my issue. That's his issue, not mine. He's falling apart, not my issue. So anyway, so how's your weekend?
My weekend was okay.
Yeah.
It's work. This time of year, it's work weekend, so.
Why? Oh, you have Honey-Do-Less.
No, I have Sirius XM on the weekends.
That's right, you have Sirius XM. Mm-hmm. That's right, I forgot. I was thinking outside.
No.
So, well, I was going to ask you, how's your sleep?
Why do you ask?
Because it's going to be part of the show today.
Oh, okay, good. Great. Thought you saw something. Sleep's actually been good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
How many hours of sleep do you get a night?
I try to get 8. I really do, but I get 7.
Okay. And then do you sleep all the way through? Is it like consistent?
Well, I'm of that age where there's usually one trip a night
you're
at
of
least.
that age that you have to urinate in the
Yeah.
middle of the evening.
At least one, maybe 2, depending on, how I did. But sleep is something I put a lot of thought and work into. I don't take it haphazardly.
No. Well, we have had this discussion before.
Yeah, I have sleep habits, and because I didn't always sleep well, so I've worked on it.
Right. Well, that's because you're a threat generator, and threat generators get sleep issues.
Yeah, right.
So,
and then on the other hand, when you do that, you threat generate, you get the sleep issues, then the sleep issues generate problems for you.
Exactly.
And I got sick of feeling bad the next day because I only got 5 hours of sleep or 4.5 hours of sleep. So,
well,
I started to take it seriously.
Well, that's good. So this is an important thing because we have had, I've talked about sleep before and mental health, but I want to revisit that. There's a couple topics I wanted to talk about today for mental health issues and just being happy and healthy, and your best healthy self. But so there's been a lot of talk in the past few years, probably the past decade, just about kind of Alzheimer's and dementia in general. And there's been an interesting surge of information just regarding, where dementia and Alzheimer's comes from and so on and so forth. And there's this very fascinating study. There's a couple, but there's one that stands out to me that I want to talk about because sleep is such an important base of everyone's mental health, and people don't realize, people think, oh, okay, it's exercise because we talk about exercise a lot and I talk about food and nutrition, but really sleep is such an important part of your mental health because it's your regenerator, and people kind of take it for granted. And, when I ask about that in an intake, or I ask about that as a consistent question, like, how's your sleep going? How's as a standard question, people kind of bypass it like, oh, it's fine. Or, oh, I have, I sleep off and on, whatever. There's always like a sporadic kind of like intermittent answer.
Yeah.
But,
who sleeps?
Yeah, exactly. Who needs sleep? Like, and I'm no different. So, I have 2 of 5 fur babies that impede my sleep on a nightly basis. I have to go away on a vacation just to have sleep because they interrupt me at least no less than 15 times a night. And people say, well, why do you let them sleep in bed with you? Well, because I do. And we're not going to debate that.
And B,
it's a choice that I make because I love the love over the sleep.
Yeah.
But
and they wouldn't live with the decision not to let them in the room. So
exactly.
It's not like they'd go along with it.
I would still be up because they'd be scratching and crying and doing all the things.
Yep.
So, but nonetheless, so sleep has a couple different things going on with it. But the most important thing that I wanted to say today is that there's this fascinating study that's out that's actually got a lot of good legs to it, that is about how dementia and Alzheimer's in people over 50 who start having, or not start, but who have poor sleep, like under 6 hours of sleep a night and lots of interrupted sleep that's under 6 hours, which isn't me and isn't you, tend to be more likely to have the vulnerability and propensity for having Alzheimer's and dementia. And so for people that don't know what that is, it's the memory disorder of the degeneration of the plaquing of the brain, the buildup of plaquing in the brain, and the degeneration of certain areas of the brain that help your memory, like, your hippocampus, your hypothalamus, your regulators in your limbic system, and your frontal lobe, and so on and so forth. And so why is that true? It's very scientifically very obvious for me, but for you guys, it's because our brain is a regenerator every single night. And so when we sleep, what we're doing is we're basically clearing the brain, which clears the body, which is why, in the morning you wake up and you have to go to the bathroom if you're not getting up 2 or 3 times a night or because of prostate issues or whatever. Yeah. But it's also the way that the liver clears, the kidney clears, the brain chemicals kind of do a reset. And I'm saying that loosely because it's not quite how it works, but just to give you a visual. But it's a regenerator every night, a restorative piece of you. So what it's doing is it's pushing the protein, pushing the protein that comes through your brain that is built up from, glutamate, salt, sugars, all the things we talk about, caffeine, alcohol, drugs, et cetera, that people do or don't do. And what it does is if you get 7-8 hours of good, consistent sleep, most of the time, then you're less likely to be vulnerable to the memory disorders that come with age in their 60s and 70s and 80s. And more likely also, and this is, I'm adding this in because this is the other piece of the other pieces of studies that come in, you're also less likely to have dementia because you're clearing, because your diabetes risk won't go up as much, because we have great research in the past 15 years on, that dementia and Alzheimer's is also diabetes type 3, which I've talked about before. So instead of type 1 and 2, which we know of, like, growing up and having it and then having, either because you're a poor eater or because you have obesity issues or because there's genetics or whatever. But we have got good research on the fact that type 3 diabetes is really, the newer name for putting around a possible explanation for why people have Alzheimer's dementia, because there's a buildup of the sugars and the proteins in the brain, which lead to the plaquing that doesn't clear. So that aside, sleeping and having good restorative sleep helps clear the protein that builds up to make those plaques, and then all the pieces that go with, the protein and the storing of like sugars and, the carbohydrates and the salts that come from, late night eating, junky eating, tiredness because you're eating. They all go together. Tiredness, so you eat more junk or you eat binge at night, lots of big ice cream bowls, and then, picking at the whatever peanut butter scoop. Someone was talking about the 3 a.m. big peanut butter scoop in the middle of the night, nightly, or sleep eating, and then laying down on it and having that heavy meal or heaviness on your head and brain, and then having it not processed because it keeps you up. Right. So such an important piece of, I think it's kind of intuitive, I think, to most people, that obviously sleep makes you feel better kind of thing, but it has such impact on your overall health and wellness on a daily basis that people don't realize that, I think. I mean, and I only say that anecdotally because I know that in my practice, one of the things that people complain about a lot, especially in the past year and a half since the pandemic, is sleep.
Yeah, people underestimate the health benefits of sleep.
Right.
And the mood benefits of sleep. And you would say people who get 7 or 8 hours of sleep are also much more pleasant to be around, generally speaking. Yeah.
Well, because it takes the agitation down. It takes your stress. It's all stress in that way, right? Is that when you're getting, say you get a 4 or 5 hour night of sleep, your stress level goes up because it never has time to really go through all the different cycles of the sleep pattern that our bodies go through. We have 5 cycles of sleep, the sleep process, the alpha, delta, beta waves, then we go through REM and then cycle back around. We do that over and over and over again through the night. And when you have 4 or 5 cycles versus 10, that's a big difference of how restorative your body will feel around that. That's, there's something to be said when people get in, traumatic brain injuries, or they get into car accidents, that they get into induced comas, to have the body set so the brain has a chance to recover and repair and flush the system, essentially.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that was the general purpose of an induced coma.
Well, it's one of, is to be able to allow the body to not be overworking and let the brain settle so that the body can come back into, homeostasis.
Go into a little bit more detail about the stages, because I remember my mother slept in shifts. She was, she'd get up early in the morning, get ready for work, and then come back after work and nap, sleep for a while, and then she'd be up late at night. So she'd work on two 3-hour stints, or 2 4-hour stints of work. Or sometimes when I'm not sleeping well, there's the nap. I got to have the nap in the middle of the day.
Right.
What's the role of napping? What's the role of
look at all these questions. Okay, so there's 5 stages of sleep, but in four distinct. Well, there's 5 distinct, but 4 that kind of go right in order. Then the 5th one, which is your Rem cycle, which is right at the end, and it's right before you go back into your light sleep. So you're going from light. You start from a lighter sleep that comes in, and you go into a deeper sleep until you get into full delta waves, right? So it goes by your wavelength in your brain, and then it comes in, pops you into the REM sleep. So when your dreaming state is sort of the in-between right before you go back into your cycle beginning again, which is why people say, oh, I remember my dreams. That's one of the reasons. Because it's not that when you're in deep sleep necessarily, but it's right on the cusps of the in-betweens between the end of the deep, right in the beginning of the light sleep. So when you're first starting out,
is that why it seems like you're dreaming right before you wake up all the time in the morning?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Or that you feel like you've been dreaming for a long, long time, and oftentimes you're not. It's just really, really quick. People say, I dreamt all night. Everybody dreams, and so when people say they don't, that's not true. But people say, I didn't dream at all, or I dreamt all night. Well, you're dreaming in these little sections of your states of sleep. So when you first go into your sleep state, it's not your restful sleep. So people say they're light sleepers. A lot of times when you see functional MRIs and you're looking at sleep study, you'll see people go into the first stage or two, and I'm sure you've experienced this. There's that little jump that you get when you're first dropping in. Well, that's called a hypnic jerk.
Hypnic jerk.
A hypnic jerk. HYPNIK. So it's a hypnic jerk, which is, it's kind of the body's way of, it's right before you go into that next stage out of the light, kind of unconscious, subconscious, like you can still hear things. You're kind of drifting in and out, and then all of a sudden it's the drop. So it's, the people that say, oh, I'm falling, or something happens and I jump, right? So it's the body's way of, the brain waves are spindling. They're going through these spindle cycles of up and down in the wave. And then sometimes that happens. But that's kind of a signifier of like you're kind of dropping into the next stage. So you go into your next two stages and basically get deeper into sleep. Your body slows, everything else slows down, and your heart rate, your brain activity, everything is really at peace, essentially, so that your brain can start doing its repair work. And by the time you get to the fourth cycle, which is your deeper delta and smaller spiking and waves, then you can go into REM. And REM is when you dream and you have all the things that are, as Freud would say in his interpretation of dreams, that's where we're doing our repair work on our wants, wishes, desires, what is, could be's, unresolved issues, things, so when people say, can we talk about a dream? And then they, it's like, something's chasing me and I always feel trapped, and they're in a family dynamic that's fake. I mean, it's usually pretty obvious because the metaphor or the symbolism of dreams is pretty obvious most of the time. So it doesn't take rocket science for some of the dreams. It's like, well, you're having sleep anxiety because of what's happening in your daily life, and so your body's trying to repair it and it's dreaming about it.
And your symbolism is a do-it-yourself structure. I mean, you're creating your own symbolism, so you should be able to tune into it fairly easily.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's some interesting interpretation of dreams that I do that, like there would be a nameless, faceless person or persons in the dream.
Yep.
And they can represent a lot of different things. So, and that's, it's kind of a thing. It's a way of interpreting someone's psychology for them so they can have something else to work on in their head that, okay, these are possibilities where you might be struggling, or this is happening. So the restful sleep, you talk about going back to the beginning, your restful sleep comes in having those full cycle circles of all those stages over and over again and not having them interrupted. So when they get interrupted, like mine or yours, right? Then the body's reparative process is kind of up and down, right? So it's harder to...
How many times do you go through that cycle in a night?
So it depends on how long you sleep.
Sure.
So say, you could go through that many times a night. You could go through that a few times a night, just depending on how many times you pop out of sleep. I mean, so, it only takes a few seconds to get into the first stage, and then you can be in the second for a few minutes, and then the third and fourth for half an hour, 45 minutes, and then REM for like 10, and then out. So and typically, I mean, sort of by person, but typically you see as the night goes on, the cycle gets shorter because your body's circadian rhythm is getting ready to wake up. So when it's only 4 hours in and you set your alarm because you're going to get up for work, your body hasn't timed that to do it. That's why people can naturally, if they have a normal set schedule of sleep, they naturally can come into their sleep pattern and come right out of it because they're getting enough, and the body knows how to cycle through 8 times, let's just say, right? 8, 9 times. So you've got 7, 8 times through the night, and your body goes, oh, I'm done, and it's repaired out. So, but when you're shortening up, you're shortchanging that process, which is why people, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon are dragging and have to have a Snickers.
Yeah. That's an important, that consistency is an important part of the sleep regime, isn't it? Going to bed at the same, I mean, even on the weekends and during the week, and trying to get up at the same time, even if you get a chance to sleep in an extra hour or two, try to keep your schedule consistent.
So yeah, I mean, people, I always say, what are you doing this weekend? I'm going to sleep in. That sleeping in for me is like,
Yeah.
that doesn't happen. I
Yeah.
mean, it's worth the shot.
Most people wake up at the same time, regardless. They get frustrated because they can sleep in and then they wake up at the time they always wake up
Exactly,
anyway.
and then to go back to sleep is like, forget it, right?
Yep.
So when you're consistent,
It's so funny because during the course of the week, the dog will rob me of 15 minutes of my last 15 minutes of sleep, and I'll be so upset. It's like, can you just give me the last 15 minutes? And then half of the week, I'm up 15 minutes before I need to be.
yeah,
And I just
and
get
then
up.
you just blame the dog.
Yeah, no, it's just
dog.
sometimes it's important to me, and sometimes
It's not. Well, and
yeah.
that probably depends on whether or not you feel rested or not. So it's interesting because, well, I don't know if it's interesting to anybody else, but so I mean, I have a set pattern, whatever, but because, I have certain cats that have physical issues currently. Yeah. This is always like, in my way. I have a diabetic cat that has to have a 7 a.m. shot with food and a 7 p.m. shot with food, right? So at like 5:30, for some reason that starts the witching hour of everyone starts stirring at 5:30. I'm like, seriously? And sometimes I just can't take it, and so 6:30 happens and he gets it early because that settles everybody back down, and that allows me to have like an extra half an hour of something if I'm so inclined to sleep that late, which doesn't usually happen.
I wonder if you train them that way too, that they get into a chronological rhythm.
Well,
because the house is usually up at,
cats are nocturnal by nature, so I have had to force them to lay down.
Yeah, I'm sure that worked well.
So, to stay sedentary for the evening is very difficult at times. But when you so going back, all cat stuff aside, the cycling through, if you're consistent and you're up at 7, and you only had 4 hours of sleep because you didn't go to bed, or you went to bed and you laid there, which is also not a good thing. Like when you go to bed and you just lay there and lay there and lay there and lay there and lay there, you're training your brain to now the bed is a place where anxiety is created to lay there and not get rest, because you're laying there thinking about nothing. I always love that answer. What are you thinking about? Nothing.
Yeah.
But you're always thinking about something. There's something always rolling in your head. So all of us in our field say, do not lay in bed after 15, 20 minutes. You get up, you go to a different room, you go to a different, go to a chair, go to a couch. Shouldn't watch TV, but I practice what I preach. I turn the TV on because that's more soothing for me. But that's not the thing you really should do, because it's really, you should have, you should read something, or you should put something on the dim light, and then, and drink something warm, not milk. That's a misnomer. That's old school. But, just kind of settle so the bed doesn't become an anxious place of why you can't sleep, and that every time you see it, you're like, I'm not going to sleep.
That's the major sleep problem, isn't it? That time when you go to bed is the front lines of that battle between your mind and yourself.
Yes.
Because when you're in bed, you have nothing else to distract you. All you have is the threats you're generating. All you have is the anxiety and the thoughts that you're dealing with.
Sure.
And there's no buffer. There's no distraction.
Right.
So you just have to deal with that. And then for most people, and for me, it ramped up to the point where it was intolerable. Just couldn't sleep. Just kept going and going and going.
Right.
So you have to. That's one of the first places you win that battle.
Right.
Hopefully.
So that's why the sleep routine and sleep hygiene piece to people kind of dismiss, but it's super important that if you're eating right before you go to sleep, and you're drinking right before you go to sleep, and I'm not talking water.
Yeah.
Right? And you're laying down on it, that's a problem. If you're not doing something ritualistic, like, putting all electronics down within an hour of going to bed. Now, this is perfect, because I will tell you right now, I don't do all of these things.
Right.
I do some of them, and I do some of them all the time, and some of the time, because, nobody's perfect, but I've figured out what works for me. But idealistically, it would be great if you could shut down at least a half an hour, 45 minutes before the electronics. No TV, no, whatever that is. And then
for me, it became changing the nature of the electronics. In other words, you're not on social media.
You're not on social
doing
media.
COVID.
You're not watching
the news.
Crime shows, which some people do. Me. At night, because that seems soothing to me to watch serial killers as I go to bed.
Yeah, for me, it's familiar television. It's probably stuff I've seen 100 times. It's just on just for Well,
wallpaper
and companionship.
And that's a common experience. I mean, my friend who's probably listening, she watches the same thing over and over. I have two friends actually that do that on a nightly basis. Two female friends that they just put it on for background noise and go to and the theme songs. We've talked about the theme songs, So, Friends is their friend and other shows, right? Sure. Like Baywatch. I brought up Baywatch for you before you did.
Yeah. I've been resisting it.
Good. I'm training you well.
But it's an important part of that changing the electronics, because you just get into something that's not stimulating is the wrong word. You don't mind stimulating, but something that's
it is stimulating. So you're trying to shut your brain down to relax. So there's a whole bunch of techniques that I give clients. But one of them is, taking and turning everything off and sitting with like some music on and just kind of thinking about nothing, which you can't do nothing. But what nothing is just letting your brain run through your day and just like sitting with music on, taking deep breaths. Journaling. I have tons of clients now that have gotten into journaling. Now, the traditional sense of journaling is very daunting for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I have a couple different structures of how to journal without having it become this thing that's like overwhelming because you don't like to write or you don't like, all those things. So there's different ways to ritualistically go into your sleep pattern. The most important thing is figuring out something that works for you that doesn't feel disconnecting. A lot of people say, but I feel disconnected. A lot of people's sleep problems stem from the fact that they feel a feel of missing out. So you know how little kids struggle to go to sleep a lot of the time, and they fight you. The fight isn't necessarily always because they're not tired. It's because they fear they're going to miss out on something. And so, and as a child going through that is perpetuating for like adolescent adulthood stress and sleep issues, because there's that feeling of missing out. But there's usually something else going on in the child's life that they feel like they're missing out if at 9:00 at night and they're 5 or 6, they're stressing about going to sleep. So it's super important to, if you have kids, to really get a good ritualistic pattern for them. And by the way, I'm not a big fan of putting kids to bed as we get into the summer before dark.
Oh, yeah.
It's a real struggle for kids, and I have a lot of parents over the years that have been like, oh, my 10-year-old, I put them to bed at 7:30. I'm like, that is in the summer. I mean,
no, you can't
so
do
the
that,
body has to regulate around the circadian rhythm, right? And I understand parents are like, okay, go to bed. But you can't put your kids to bed when it's light out and there's kids still playing outside, because so that's an aside issue. But it is important that you're creating an environment for the body's trying to get into its rhythm. So the body's regulated on light and dark. So when we get closer to evening and dark, that's the body knows to shut down. That's why, going back to dementia and Alzheimer's patients, that once they start going into the evening hours, we have the sundowning effect, because the brain knows that it's time to start shutting down. And that's when you see a lot of, in later forms of the later stages of memory disorders, you see people ramping up with agitation, belligerence, all those things, because the brain is starting to unravel itself at night. So it's the same thing what you're doing in a non-memory issued brain, that when you're creating poor patterns, that's what's happening. You're having these issues of
in many ways you're inciting the battle.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so what that sets you up for is the psychology of the next day being very behind.
Yeah.
So, sleeping, lagging. Oh, and then let's add in sleep medication. So there's another piece, right? So sleep medications, things like Seroquel, Trazodone, Ambien, NyQuil, over the counter, right? The other ones are prescriptive.
Yep.
Things like that. The prescriptive Ambien, Trazodone, Seroquel are technically only supposed to be short-term, and I mean short-term, not every day.
Right.
And by short-term, like under 6 months or less of use. And that's really on the outside, coming from like a holistic perspective. You don't want to be using them because they're highly addictive. And I call those the floor lickers. So I have a couple set of medications that I talk about when I teach about them, about like they're the floor lickers, because when you take them, the next day, even if you take them within 8 to 10 hours of you waking up, you wake up and you're like hungover, and I call it the floor licker, because your body they're so heavy hitting, and they go through, they process through your liver
Yep.
and kidney. They metabolize that way. When your brain shuts down, so if you remember what I said at the beginning of the show, the brain shuts down to do restorative. Now it's got a medication that's got a lot of charge to it, trying to like fight it and clear it and move it through the body. And that's what it does. So it shuts your brain down, so the brain goes into slower motion, and then you have to be able to process it.
Yeah.
So by the time you get up, you have a hangover. Not in the same way as alcohol, but my patients report always like, I feel like I'm like hungover, or I'm so foggy, and I feel facial heaviness, and it takes them, they get up at 8, and it takes them till 1 to finally feel like they've cleared, and then they're going to take it again at 8 that night. And I'm like, okay. So you have to remember that those types of medications, although they work to help you get good sleep, good being in air quotes, it's a facade over long periods of time. It doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
And it goes back to, it's a Band-Aid, but it has its place to help people when they're having trouble, so they can get some rest, because it's more important to have that rest, but you still have to be able to wean off. And people stay on those I have some patients that have been on those medications for years, and they're addicted, so they can't.
Yep.
They could get off, but it's a process of, and to get off those, you have to replace one of those with a different one of those, and then wean it. It's just,
but often you go back right into the same battleground when you get off of those, which is why
exactly.
people don't.
Well, because
you're not
doing
solving the underlying problem.
Well, if you're not doing the work on the underlying problem that caused the sleep issue in the first place, then you're right back to where you started. But this is like talking about ADD last week and medications, right? Medications serve their purpose, but the reason why you have them is so that you're working on the problem while you're on them, so that the problem doesn't have to continue to then have to keep using the medication, because those medications aren't meant for long term. So when people have medications on board, we often talk about making sure that they're working on, and that's one of my jobs, I don't know if all psychologists do this, but I always work on making sure that whatever medication the person's on, we're treating the underlying condition that they're being treated for with the medication, so we're not missing it, so that eventually, if a person decides, I don't want to be on that anymore, they can choose that, because they've been working on how to coping strategy all the way through it without the medication. But the longer you stay on a medication that's addictive, as you know, and you've done many shows on this, the more fear-driven you are about the anticipatory anxiety of coming off of it, and what will be, and the unknown of what if I'm a mess. So short-term, really important, and also being mindful that it plays with the brain chemistry to not be able to do what it needs to do on its own, just like any medication, right? In terms of in psych meds, I'm not talking like antibiotics or things like cancer or chemo or things like that. But
and it's not an addiction issue, but I was on a good run with melatonin up until we talked a couple weeks ago.
Right.
Then I decided to drop it, and there are I like melatonin, but there are some issues with it. One of which is a 3-hour wake up.
Right.
Which talked about it also kickstarts your dreams.
Right.
There's a lot more dreaming with melatonin.
Right.
And not always restful dreams.
Right.
Right. And the other thing about it is what you just described is melatonin is an 8-hour commitment.
Right.
So even if you get up at 6.5 hours, you get an hour and a half to deal with before that clears on you.
And people don't realize that.
Yeah.
That's because what melatonin does, just for people that don't know this and missed a previous show, is that melatonin is a circadian rhythm regulator. It's a sleep aid, but it's not supposed to be used daily. And if it is used daily, it's like every 2 or 3 days, then off a day or two. Because it's what it's doing is it's regulating your sleep cycle, which helps you sleep. But people don't know that, and then they say, "Oh, but it's helping me sleep," because for a lot of people, it helps them sleep. Again, people not watching, air quoting, it helps them sleep, but it's not really helping you sleep. It's helping your circadian rhythm, which is the rhythm that goes on light and dark, re-regulate itself so that it gets proper restorative repair, which is why when you take melatonin, it's an 8-hour commitment, and you get up at 6 hours in, you're dragging, and then you're drinking 17 cups of coffee to bring, so it's a very vicious cycle that,
Plus that creates more issues, doesn't it, in long-term use, because it inhibits your body's natural ability to regulate this.
Right, exactly. That's why not to use it every day or to use it every other day. you need to have vacations from that. And that's why a lot of people, when I see people, they'll come in and like, oh, I've been on melatonin for a year. It doesn't work anymore. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm at 10 milligrams and it's still not working. Right. Because it's not a sleep medication. It's not for sleep. It's for helping you regulate the rhythm. And now the rhythm is like, well, now it's fighting. It's fighting you.
There's actually, I saw a study or a piece the other day, and I forget the source and how reliable it was and anything, but they were talking about people being on melatonin just on a daily basis.
Yes.
Just general regulator, and I can't even imagine trying to go through a day, on melatonin without sleeping.
Right.
I don't know how, do people actually do that?
So I don't have any clients currently. I'm trying to think if I've ever had any clients that do that. Yeah. I don't think I have, but maybe I'm unaware. But
and it was an anxiety type of.
Yeah, I don't have any anecdotally that do that, but I do have clients that not that, but they have taken like Seroquel during the day as an anxiety. So Seroquel is a sleep med, right? So a floor liquor. It makes my eye twitch when I hear that. And then also Clonidine. Clonidine is a really common, this is all like in addiction work a lot of times, in ADD work. Clonidine is used for sleep, to get the body and everything to calm down. Works really great, less side effects than things like Seroquel, Trazodone, and Ambien. But the Clonidine itself can be used during the day as well. It takes down like agitation, all those things. But again, just like caffeine, just like sugar, it's changing the body chemistry to be able to do what it needs to do on its own. So long term, short term, great. Long term, repetitive use, the body gets used to it. Hormonal, people don't realize as you get older, your body changes, your metabolism changes. That means if you're on a long term medication, that needs to change as well at some point, needs to be relooked at, because your body and your chemistry is always changing. Say you're going through menopause as a female and you're on medications. Your hormones are really what's regulating a lot of what goes on for your mental health in a lot of ways. So if you're on a mental health medication for psych meds, and then you've gone through menopause, or you're in perimenopause, or whatever it is, for instance, that's going to move around.
You're all over the map.
You're all over the map. If you're a teenager coming into puberty and you're on those medications we talked about last week, and you're going through puberty, and basically that's up until you're like 23 years old, essentially, and you've started on methylphenidate at 8, and now you're 15 and that's not touching you because you're still feeling all over well, your hormones have moved around. So that means you're metabolizing in your liver and kidney very differently than you were when you were 8, when you didn't have the same hormones and progesterone and estrogen and testosterone all running. So that's why the mind-body connection, even though people kind of cringe because they think it's mind-body because it's brain-body. It's they're constantly talking because the system is recharging all the time with chemicals that are changing. And when you add in any chemical, if broccoli, that's going to banana, potassium's going to change. You add in Chinese food and you don't say no MSG, that changes your brain. So if we just look at things and not say, oh, drugs and medication, okay, let's just take daily stuff, that impacts your mental health and your physical well-being all the time, because it's a whole package all the time. Nobody's perfect. I'm certainly not. And we all have these things, but it's important to know so you can make mindful, good decisions on what you're putting in, how you're processing it, where you're at in your age and stage. Do you exercise? Exercise metabolizes your body faster. Drinking lots of water. It's all those package deals, which is what I've, make your best healthy life by making your best package for yourself. I'm always making changes and tweaking things. And so now it's like, okay, I'm on another kick right now. So
many times with drugs, it's a fight to find the dosage. And that's the fight people think they're battling, but they think it's a fixed target. Right. And it's not a fixed target, especially as you mentioned in menopause and puberty. Right. I mean, targets are all over the place on a day-to-day basis. Right. So it's just really hard to hone in on it and be effective with it.
Right. And then if we talk about mixed targets, right? So you talk about females, and there is a gender difference, like you talk about females after puberty. Well, you still have, every 2 weeks in a first part of a front menstrual cycle of a female, the hormonal change is so different. And that's why you have like a hormonal back end change on the last 2 weeks, because women tend to have lots of drop and lots of increase, and depends on who they are and genetically how they're built. There's some months where you're like happy, and you get some women that are crying all the time or raging, And then that's just on your no medication, just kind of day-to-day stuff, and then all of a sudden you add anything in.
Yeah.
Right. And oh, by the way, men also have that, but it just in a little different way. So women go through like menopause and like hormonal changes. Men go through andropause and hormonal changes, which is when most of the time, unless they've been doing drugs or alcohol that's off the chart in their 20s, erectile dysfunction comes along, and people like men in their 40s start sometimes, in 50s and 60s, because that same thing happens. Yeah. So there are gender changes in both genders that impact medication use in sleep and reparative work and so on and so forth.
But is it true with men that it's more of a slower long-term change, almost to the point where it's gradual enough that people don't perceive it's happening? Whereas women, the cycles are more extreme and more frequent.
Yes, I would say that would probably be a good way to describe it, and it's not, it's much more subtle. And I also think there's a social norm thing into it, just at least over my years of doing this, that men aren't trained to pay attention to that as much, because women, it's just, women have their periods and women are doing this, and, women are highlighted in that, whereas men aren't.
Men don't talk about moods. It's supposed to talk about moods. You're not supposed to talk about subtle discomforts.
Right. So I think that there is much more there that's just been socially suppressed in the gender of being male than there is in female. Like female, it's like out there, everyone talks about it. Whereas, going back to the ADD last week and talking about that in combination with today, a lot of times adults have been missed with those types of diagnostics, because in men especially, because
that's a weakness.
Yeah, it's and
men don't admit to weaknesses.
He's an angry man, or he's agitated, and that's just who he is. But it's really usually a process of some chemical change and the hormonal change, and all the things that I've talked about for all the different things across the board combined together, and they're happening in men as well. So it's very similar, it's just not as in the mainstream.
So the sleep battle for me condensed down to the everyday battle for me, which is to stay, because anxiety is about relitigating the past or worrying about the future. And that becomes so prominent when you're laying in bed in the dark and you have nothing else to distract you from those thoughts. That's the battleground. It's about getting into the present and dropping your anxieties about the future, relitigating the past. For a while I went through, and I'm using the air quotes too, is sleep hypnosis tapes.
Yep.
Because it's just a way to center your mind on where you are, as opposed to not worrying about other things. And I think that's the daily battle for everyone, but it's particularly prominent right before you go to sleep.
So sleep hypnosis tapes are like listening to something like Calm, or putting on, it's distractor. So what it's doing is it's taking you with a helpful aid outside of yourself when you can't do it for yourself, or you haven't been able to do it for yourself, to just focus your mindset somewhere else so that it relaxes the brain to do what it's supposed to do on its own, which is usually when people just drift off.
Right.
So when you're talking about sleep hypnosis, the hypnotic state isn't, going and cluck like a chicken.
Yeah.
It's hypnosis is really coming into a state of mind of brainwave activity that drops because your breath slows, your respiratory rate slows, you're able to have your nervous system kind of come to a peaceful homeostasis.
We do it all the time. Driving is often a time when we're in a state of hypnosis. I remember when I was a season ticket holder for the Patriots, all of a sudden I'd end up north of the South Station Tunnel. How the hell did I get there? I wasn't
exactly.
It's like I wasn't even paying attention to that whole drive up from Foxborough.
Right, because you're in that's a meditative state.
Yeah.
And so it'd be great if we could get, if I could get more people to understand that meditation isn't this like weird off-color thing that you can't do because it makes you strange. We do it all the time. When we're daydreaming, you're meditating.
Yep.
When you have found yourself off in the distance, not thinking about what was going on, or someone's talking, like I may be talking now, and someone's zoning me out.
Yep.
You're actually meditating.
Showers.
Because you're
in the shower.
People do their best thinking shower. Run.
Yeah.
When I go for a run, or I go for a long walk, that's all meditative, because my brain goes into a space of just, I think about lots of things, but the stress comes down, and it goes into this space of relaxation where it's totally different.
But you're not in the future, and you're less in the future, and you're less in the past.
You're not in the future. You're just in this, the zone. So for athletes, it's like the zone, but just for the brain. It's not the whole body necessarily, but it can be. So that would be the goal, to get a person's brain right before sleep to start going into that space so that you can have restorative sleep. And when you have any of the unnatural pharmaceutical grade things happening, it changes your sleep. When you put in something that's natural, even though I'm a big proponent for that, that still changes your ability to sleep in your own way. But they're handy to help you get, as long as you're working on the underlying issues. But at the end of the day, it always comes back to, Lou, is that, are you active? Are you keeping your brain active? Are you keeping your body active? Are you eating healthy? Are you putting a cutoff that you're not eating a sleeve of Oreos 20 minutes before you go to bed?
Damn.
And things like that.
Yeah. Not that I do that, but no, I would like to.
I know lots of people that do that.
But, and this skill of getting, and it's to put it in a way that people can relate to, I guess, it's about being in the moment.
Yes.
And being okay with where you are right now. That skill is so vital for everything, and you can do it. Just start for half an hour. I'm not going to worry about this. I'm setting that down for half an hour. Learn that skill, and then you can do it at bedtime, and you get better at it, and you start getting motivated by that, because those are good times. So you start doing it more and more. You naturally enhance that skill because it's a good place to be.
Right. So I'm gonna take what you said and put it to start with 1 minute.
Yeah.
Because it's like the exercise thing. You're not running a marathon, you're walking 10 steps.
Right.
So it's the same thing as if you want to start relaxing your brain and practicing that, it's take 1 minute in the morning. 1 minute. And people will say, I don't have time. I always love that. You definitely have time.
Yep.
Because if you're taking a shower, and if you're not taking a shower, then do it in the car. And if you're not doing it in the car, then 1 minute it's amazing how quick 1 minute can go by, right? So just start with 1 minute, and you're not clearing your brain of everything. All you're doing is sitting, close your eyes and just sit and listen. Pick one of your 5 senses and just either look at something for a minute, focus on something you hear, focus on your breath, but you're just practicing a mindful state of just being in the moment. And that doesn't mean that everything else is going to go away. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions about meditation and sleep or whatever, is that people, there's all those key words that are like, let go of everything. And that makes people anxious. Or forget everything about today. That makes people anxious, because they can't do it. Because you're not actually trying to get rid of anything. You're just trying to be present.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to let go of things. You talk to anyone who, if you ever get a chance, and people are afraid of this too, if you ever get a chance, Lou, you probably have already done this, to talk to someone who practices Buddhism or a Buddhist monk. There's Buddhist monks that are down the street from me in both of my offices, home and whatever. And occasionally when I'm out for a walk or whatever.
I'm doing this podcast now with a Hindu.
Right. So
with the Gita, which we're 140 episodes in. So
you're
learning some of these techniques.
Exactly.
Yeah. And attitudes and thoughts and your relationship with just things in general. Your relationship with your thoughts.
And in relationship to yourself.
Yeah.
And so just having even a 2-minute conversation with, and you don't have to find someone that's a Buddhist monk like we do, but to have that, it's such an interesting perspective shift. And that perspective shift, if you're open to just having the thought that there could be something different, doesn't mean you have to buy into everything someone says, but just being open to the fact that it doesn't have to be the way that you're living currently. What a difference that can make. If you don't have anyone by you or you're afraid to reach out to someone because it feels weird to you, there's amazing things written on Google. You can go and you can read Thich Nhat Hanh. Have you ever?
No.
So Thich Nhat Hanh is a very famous writer of really quick quotes. I mean, he's written beautiful long things on forgiveness and compassion, self-compassion, and certainly if anyone's interested, I can have you put up something for people. But he's a great writer. You can get lots of different interesting things just on like one little page of how to live today in the present. And not hard writing, really easy, applicable, daily, and just being, kind, loving, good person. Just to have the brain be calm, which brings you into sleep that's calmer, so that you learn how to be present instead of past and forward.
It's not an all or nothing thing. And,
Right.
and this whole process for me was like riding a bike. It was really difficult to accomplish, but once you accomplish it, you have it and you just get better at it. Right. And it's just, it doesn't mean you don't plan. It doesn't mean you don't worry about the past. It doesn't mean you don't take care of things. It means that there are certain times during the day where you can just be where you are and everything's okay.
Exactly.
That problem will still be there in a half an hour. It'll be there tomorrow morning. There's nothing I can do about it. Get in that space. So I'm going to watch Baywatch.
There it is.
Yeah.
And there it is.
But no, but that's the state you want to, I mean, not necessarily with Baywatch, but that's the state you want to be in where it's just
So
like.
it's Baywatch.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Well, now I'm in my head going, every time you mention Baywatch, I go right to Pamela Anderson in my head and David Hasselhoff. I can't help it. And that's all I have in my head now.
Yeah.
Stop doing that to me. Okay. So
David's good. Pam's not the prime point here.
So the meditative state during the day, there's a superstition, and I'm using that word just because I'm thinking of a particular client that she and I've worked a lot on her sleep. There's a superstition piece to it that if you think about the problems hard enough over and over again, that you have a sense of control over them, that they will go away. But the problem is, and I've pointed this out to her many times, is have they ever gone away by the amount of time you spent thinking about them over? And the answer is no, right? And then do they ever come to be with how she's thought them through? The answer is still no. They don't ever pan out, like ever.
Right.
Like all the fear generation and the threat generation that she has. So she ends up going to, we've changed her sleep pattern and now it's like spectacular. But it took us about a year and a half to really move it because first we had to keep cycling through, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work, this isn't, because she was so wed to the pattern she already had. And then saying, okay, let's just do like little inches of believing in this might work here, and just being like, let's write down 10 worries before you go to bed. 10. And we had more.
Yeah.
10, but and just starting little patterns to create a lift of her superstition that, if I control for it by controlling for it, then I will be in control.
Yeah.
And that is one of the biggest problems of sleep issues in people, is that they don't even realize subconsciously and unconsciously that when they're even ramping up at 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night to come into sleep when they have a sleep issue anyway, their brain's already thinking about how they're not going to sleep.
Right.
And then they go, so they're always anticipating, which is why you have a lot of late night sleepers. I'm a late nighter. I'm nowhere near what I used to be, but that was why. It'd be because I'd be up planning for the 17 things that would come the next day and doing, and then I realized, I need to take my own advice about, 15 years ago, going, I can't do that anymore. So following my own advice, I'm like, okay, I have to back this down, do all the things I've been saying to you guys, and really be able to say, I have no control over that. It doesn't matter because it's irrelevant. And so many things, as we've talked about, once you turn a certain age, they don't matter. They didn't matter before, but really they don't matter.
Yeah, no. Yeah, exactly.
So which brings me into another topic that we didn't get to today, but I will talk about it next week, about the worry about what other people think, which leads into an epic topic of weeks on end now of, okay, everyone's trying to get back into possibly going out and being in the world, and I have people that don't want to do it. They want to stay home because they become socially anxious, socially complacent, socially isolated, and they're happy about it. And they're happy about it, and I say it loosely, but they're happy about it, but they're not, but they are.
Yeah.
Because
they haven't had to worry about it, what other people think, based on that topic.
Right.
And the dirty little secret is, you never have to worry about it, what other people think. That's a choice.
Right. And so there's so many pieces about this. So there's been a lot of talk on social media lately about, people emerging from quarantine. Oh, and then, which is going to be a whole topic about people's ideas of who's wearing a mask, who hasn't worn a mask, who's doing a mandate, who's not doing a mandate, and all the socialization pieces around that. And then how you're perceived with that, and who's going to think what of you. And you and I have had conversations about the judgment zone. And even so, like, just really quickly, because we'll talk about this next week, is, this week in New Hampshire, last week, Governor Sununu was putting out that no more masks, right? Well, that turned on a dime.
Yep.
Faster than I think he spit it out, that he was going to have no masks anymore, because people reared up and said, oh my God, it's not in compliance to what we really think we should do science-wise. And so now he extended it to the 7th of May to not do that yet. And then the social pressure that's coming out, so for Massachusetts now, as of like last night or this morning, I heard that, there's this pressure now. So aside from anything about that and political stuff, it's more about, okay, people coming out of their social quarantine of being isolated, coming into the world that they haven't been in. Like, we've been out in the world watching this happen all year, and we're like, okay, well, here it is. But there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans who've really not been out in the world. And the push has been, I'm afraid, first of all, to be sick still. I'm afraid to go out and have people sneeze, cough, think, look, judge, and all these. There's so many pieces.
Well,
that are
this is
keeping
the
people
fundamental.
home.
This is the fundamental test, mental test for people. It's the test of external control.
Right.
COVID is that fear that we've all lived with and grown up with. We can't control what's going, or we try to control what's going on around us. Mm-hmm. And of course, with COVID, you really can't. You can take some safety precautions. You can do that, but you don't have control over it totally. And that's the fear. That's the fundamental fear that everyone faces. Why it hit the society so hard. Right. Because that was the external control that we don't have. It was a reminder that, we're vulnerable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that the external control.
And that got all the control freaks really wound up during this.
It goes back to that. I'm going to call it the superstition, kind of like the sleep thing. It's if I control for the control of the control, then I feel like I'm in more control.
Yep.
And I'll go back to what I always say: stay in your own lane. Mm-hmm. Let that person and that person and that person do whatever they're going to do. As long as you're doing what's right for you and you know what's right for you, and you're not imposing, and I'm big on this, not imposing any kind of threat on anybody else. So it's kind of like emotional. Like, you don't step over anyone's emotional boundaries. You don't step over anyone's physical boundaries. You're not impinging on someone else or infringing on someone else. Then you just do your own thing.
Yeah, but you're advocating internal control.
Well, yes.
And people have a lot of trouble giving up their myth of external control.
I know. Well, no one's going to get any further by going out and policing everybody else.
Right.
I mean, seriously. I mean, that's the end. The end of the day, no one's going to get. You might.
No, but a sternly worded Facebook post is going to save everybody.
You what?
A firmly worded Facebook post is going to save everybody. That's what people believe.
I have so many things to say about that. Right. Yeah. Don't get me started on the Facebook post.
Yeah. But that's the illusion of external control.
Right. Well, that's a whole other thing. So the takeaway for today is that try to create a little bit of a ritual before you go to bed of calming your brain. Try to manage your medications if you're doing that in a healthy way so that you're not relying on them only.
Yep.
And of course, get good exercise during the day and get good intake of good water, good hydration, good food, and and kind of maybe revamp and start from there if you're not doing any of those things, and keeping in mind all the things I said about 6 hours, 8 hours, and I'll try to practice that too. I have felines that get in the way of that problem, which is fine by me. So I'll probably be dementing by the time I'm 70. That's okay, not really. So that's horrific. So next week we'll be talking about the worry and the social perception of coming back out of the quarantine and social anxiety of the pandemic. And I'm sure I'll have another topic as well.
So we'll be ready if it ever happens.
It's happening, Lou.
Okay.
All right. So you guys have a fantastic week and enjoy the spring.